Well, I don't know that it's a shift. We've all known that this administration ignores ethics, ignores the laws.
But Chris Christie, that's a different voice.
Well, it is, and I think we're finding Republican supporters of President Trump, one by one, starting to realize that this administration is corrupt and has been corrupt from day one. And our lawsuit is about foreign government money that has been going to the president in violation of the United States Constitution. We have the incidents involving cabinet members getting money and favors from lobbyists. We just today had the President of the United States making statements that were false, probably knowingly false, about Amazon driving the stock price down. If an investor lost money in that stock, that investor could sue him for securities fraud, and those investors ought to be calling a lawyer. It's every day we have a new violation of either the Constitution, the federal statutes, or the ethics regulations. It's over and over again. And yes, I think people like Chris Christie are finally getting fed up, and the voters are getting fed up. I've been fed up with this president ever since he was a candidate, and it was very clear he was going to violate the law if he won the election, and that's what we've had nonstop.
One of the things, Chris Christie there was talking Scott Pruitt and this apartment he rented down in Washington. Hugh, you and I have spoke via Twitter on this, and you're saying it's much ado about nothing. Why?
Well, let me begin by saying Scott Pruitt is a very old friend of mine, and I've had him on my show a dozen times. And my son works at EPA, so I want to be very transparent. But I've been the designated agency ethics officer at two agencies. Like Professor Painter, I worked in the White House counsel's office as well. And the key opinion here is that of Kevin Manoli. He is the principal deputy attorney general at EPA. He's also the designated agency ethics officer. He's a lifer. He's been there since 2000. Gina McCarthy, President Obama's administrator, made him the principal deputy associate attorney general at EPA. And Mr. Manoli reviewed the lease and upheld it. It is not in any way, shape, or form a gift. It's much ado about nothing. I think this is really about policy, Stephanie, as we talked about on Twitter. And I think it's about the Vacancy Act. Specifically, people on the left are upset with Scott Pruitt over the Clean Power Plan, which he repealed, the Waters of the United States, which he repealed, the CAFE standards today, which he put up for repeal. He's executing Donald Trump's policy on WOTUS and on regulatory rollback, and they want him out. They're also afraid that if for any reason Attorney General Sessions leaves the Attorney Generalship, under the Vacancy Act, Scott Pruitt is eligible for up to 210 days to serve as Attorney General, and even beyond, Hugh, depending on circumstances.
There are ethics issues and self-dealing issues that go far beyond Scott Pruitt. So let's go back to the New York Magazine cover, where Jonathan Chait writes, "To be out for yourself is probably the single most disqualifying flaw a politician can have." Do you, Hugh Hewitt, who has a much longer history around politics than I do you have ethics concerns with President Trump or his administration when it comes to self-dealing?
Yes, always. As I said, I served as an ethics officer for two agencies, and I'm aware of Professor Painter's 180 different complaints against the agencies across the government. But in every case, Stephanie, it's a fact and circumstances inquiry. I think every single case against Scott Pruitt has been a nagging political attack to slow down the agenda.
Okay, then let's go broader than Scott Pruitt. We can go Jared Kushner. We can go President Trump.
Can you find me
Richard?
Find me a hotel room for $50 a night in Washington, D.C., and tell me that's not a gift from a lobbyist. This is disgusting, and no decent ethics lawyer would sign off on that. If that had happened in the Bush administration, I would have shut it down in a minute. $50 a night to get a room in Washington, D.C. You know, we all know that that is a violation of the gift rules, and no ethics lawyer could cover that up. It's just flat out wrong, and you know it.
Well, I would say that, Mr. Painter, I don't know Mr. Manoli, and I don't know you, but I wouldn't slander a career professional who's been there for 18 years.
I will.
And
no
was
career professional would ever sign off on that. $50 a night in Washington, D.C.
He did.
Give me a break.
So you're
That's
manifestly wrong. But
Get
by
me
all
that
means,
room at
180
$50
complaints
a night.
against the administration. By
I
all
did
means,
not file
carry on
180
slandering
complaints.
Okay,
Get
you know,
me
then I
a
ask
room
you
for $50 a night in Washington.
Hugh Hewitt, when was the last time you stayed in Washington, D.C.?
a month ago in my own home, which, by the way, I have often given to friends, but Mr. Pruitt could not use it because of the gift rules. That's one of the funny things about this, Stephanie. When you've got friends in Washington, you come to town for 5 months and your wife is at home with the last 5 months of your son finishing high school, you can't stay at a friend's house because of the gifts rules. Despite Mr. Painter's passion, which is misplaced.
You cannot stay at a lobbyist's house when you're the EPA chief and your work could directly impact theirs.
John Boehner stayed at a lobbyist's house, rented it from him for 10 years as majority leader of the House. It goes to whether or not it's a gift. And by the way, it's not owned by Stephen Hart, who's been a friend of mine, again, transparency for 25 years.
You don't think $50 a night is a gift? You don't think $50 a night is a gift? How much do you think hotel rooms cost in Washington?
All I'm telling you is it was reviewed by the career deputy senior associate general and the ethics official at the agency, for whom I have no knowledge but great deal of respect. Mr. Painter doesn't. He's entitled to pass judgment on whomever he wants, but there's a reason he's in Minnesota, not in Washington, D.C. And that reason goes back to whether or not you have due regard for other professionals' work. I do. I have heard only good things about Mr.
Excuse me, I am fed up with people being attacked in Minnesota,
I'm sure you are.
in my state. We elect people in Washington, D.C. We are sick and tired of K Street lobbyists who look down on us in Minnesota and say, well, this is the reason you're in Minnesota, instead of raking in money in Washington, D.C. on K Street and leasing out a room for $50 a night to the EPA administrator. This is corruption. This is why the people of Minnesota and every other state here in flyover country where you want to look down at us, we are going to vote these people out. It is disgusting what you just said about people in Minnesota, that somehow we are here because we don't play by your rules in Washington, D.C. We're going to shut it down. We're going to drain the swamp for sure. And this backfill they brought in from New York, we're going to send those people back to New York, New Jersey, wherever they came from, that Trump brought on down. This is really wrong, and you know it. And don't talk down to us in Minnesota.
Can we just end this segment dogging on New Jersey?